She thought he was going to propose. Instead, he led her into the desert.
The search concluded with the discovery of Erin Corwin's body in a 140-foot mine shaft.
Her husband had no idea. And the man she trusted most had already searched online how to dispose of a body. 2 months later, search teams would discover her 76 meters underground. But what investigators uncovered afterward revealed this wasn't just an affair. It was a plan. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. On the morning of June 28, 2014, Erin Corwin left her home on the Marine base in 29 Palms, California, telling her husband Jonathan that she was going hiking in Joshua Tree National Park. It was a simple explanation, routine even, the kind of outing she had mentioned before. Jonathan had no reason to question it. Erin loved the outdoors. She loved quiet spaces, animals, and open skies. That morning felt ordinary, and ordinary mornings are often the last moments anyone ever suspects will matter. As the hours passed, Jonathan began calling her. Once. Twice. 10 times. By the end of the day he had called nearly 50 times. Each call went unanswered. No text. No explanation. Just silence. That silence stretched into the evening and then into fear. When Erin failed to return home, Jonathan reported her missing. Search teams began combing the desert. Helicopters scanned the vast landscape from above, their shadows sweeping across sand and rock. Her car was eventually located, abandoned in a remote area far from the main trails. There was a faint smell of gasoline nearby, a detail that would later raise serious questions. At that moment, however, all anyone knew was that a 19-year-old woman had vanished into one of the most unforgiving environments in California. And police didn't yet know she had gone to meet someone in secret. Before Erin ever walked into the desert that morning, before helicopters circled overhead and search teams traced tire marks through sand, her life had already begun to fracture in quieter ways. Marriage at 19 is heavy with expectation. Erin had left Tennessee full of hope, certain that love would be enough to carry her through the unfamiliar rhythm of military life in 29 Palms. But isolation settled in quickly. Jonathan's training schedules were demanding. Days were long. Weeks blurred together. The base felt small, the desert endless. And inside their apartment, conversations grew shorter. There had been a miscarriage not long before the affair began, a loss that Erin carried differently than Jonathan. For her, it was not only grief but confusion, a questioning of her body, her worth, her future. She wanted reassurance. She wanted certainty. Instead, she often felt alone. It was during this fragile period that their neighbors became their closest companions. Christopher Brandon Lee and his wife Nicole lived nearby, and what began as casual evenings together soon became routine. They shared dinners, laughed at small things, and leaned on each other during deployments and late-night shifts. Christopher, recently returned from Afghanistan, carried himself with quiet intensity. He had served honorably, but fellow Marines had noticed something unsettled in him since his return. There were reports of reckless handling of firearms, moments where his judgment seemed impulsive, even careless. He spoke little about his deployment, but the distance in his eyes suggested experiences he kept sealed away. Around Erin, however, he was attentive. He listened. He asked questions Jonathan sometimes forgot to ask. He noticed when she seemed withdrawn. What began as comfort gradually shifted into something charged, something secret. And as the friendship deepened, boundaries blurred in ways that would later echo inside a mine shaft 76 meters underground. Do you think affairs like this are about love, or opportunity? What began as shared dinners and casual conversations gradually shifted into something far more intimate. Erin and Christopher Brandon Lee found themselves alone more often, sometimes under ordinary circumstances, sometimes by quiet design. One evening, while Jonathan and Nicole sat in the living room watching television, Erin and Christopher moved into another room under the pretense of playing video games. It was harmless on the surface. Comfortable. Familiar. But emotional boundaries had already been weakening for weeks. Christopher listened when Erin spoke about her loneliness. He validated her grief over the miscarriage. He told her she deserved more attention, more understanding. And in that private space, the dynamic changed. A look lasted too long. Silence felt charged rather than casual. Then he leaned in, and she didn't pull away. The first kiss was brief but decisive. It transformed a friendship into secrecy in a matter of seconds. After that night, communication intensified. They texted constantly, deleting messages, creating hidden threads, using ordinary errands as cover for brief meetings. Every vibration of a phone carried risk. Every shared glance across a room carried implication. It wasn't reckless at first. It was calculated. Careful. But secrecy has weight, and eventually that weight cracks. Nicole discovered messages on Christopher's phone that could not be explained as harmless conversation. The confrontation was immediate and emotional. Accusations filled the room. Promises were demanded. Both couples agreed the relationship would end. Boundaries would be restored. Marriages would be repaired. But even after being exposed, they didn't stop. The secrecy only intensified. The stakes only grew. And then Erin sat across from Christopher with something that shifted everything beyond hidden messages and stolen moments. Her voice was steady, but the meaning was irreversible. She told him she was carrying his child. Silence. When Erin told Christopher Brandon Lee she was carrying his child, the balance shifted. Up until that moment, their relationship had existed in fragments, stolen conversations, hidden messages, quick meetings under ordinary excuses. But pregnancy introduces permanence. It demands decisions. And according to investigators, it was shortly after that revelation that Christopher's online activity began to change. Internet searches appeared that would later be read aloud in court: how to dispose of a body, how long it takes for a body to decompose, remote mine shafts in the desert. These were not emotional searches typed in anger during an argument. They were methodical, specific, deliberate. Around the same time, he acquired a propane tank. He researched confined spaces. He began exploring abandoned mine shafts scattered across the vast desert terrain surrounding 29 Palms and Joshua Tree. He borrowed equipment under casual pretenses. He told fellow Marines he was going coyote hunting. He packed a rifle. Each step, on its own, could be explained away. A Marine hunting in the desert is not unusual. Exploring old mines is common in that region. But when investigators later laid the timeline side by side, the pattern became impossible to ignore. He had visited at least one mine shaft days before Erin disappeared. He had studied it, measured it, evaluated its depth. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was preparation. The man Erin trusted most had already searched online how to dispose of a body before he ever led her into the desert. And while she believed she was meeting him for something hopeful, something life-changing, he was calculating risk. He was thinking about concealment. He was thinking about permanence in a very different way. But what he didn't expect was how long it would take to find her. On the morning of June 28, 2014, Erin left her home believing she was stepping into a turning point. Christopher Brandon Lee had asked her to meet him in the desert. He framed it as something important. Something that would define their future. She may have believed he was going to propose. She may have believed this was the moment he would choose her openly, finally separating fantasy from reality. Instead, he drove her deep into the desert landscape outside 29 Palms, to terrain so isolated that even experienced hikers avoid it. The sun was high. The ground uneven. There were no crowds. No witnesses. No one close enough to hear raised voices carried by wind. When they reached the abandoned mine shaft he had previously explored, the mood shifted. There was no ring. No promise. Only confrontation. What exactly was said in those final moments will never be fully known, but investigators believe an argument broke out. Erin, likely confused and frightened, may have realized something was wrong. At some point, Christopher fired his rifle into the air. The sound would have echoed across the open desert, but in that vast emptiness, it meant nothing. It was either a warning, a threat, or a way to silence resistance. He had brought a rope device he had constructed himself. It was not improvised in panic. It had been prepared. In the struggle that followed, Erin lost balance near the opening of the shaft. Whether pushed or forced backward, the result was the same. She fell 76 meters into darkness. While Erin lay 76 meters below the surface, the world above her moved in widening circles of panic. Jonathan called again and again in those first hours, hoping for a simple explanation. When none came, law enforcement mobilized quickly. What began as a missing persons report escalated into one of the most extensive searches the region had seen in years. Over the course of weeks, more than 3,000 kilometers of desert terrain were covered. 6 separate agencies coordinated efforts. Ground teams walked harsh landscapes under relentless heat. Helicopters traced grids overhead. Volunteers handed out flyers. Her photo spread across social media, across base housing units, across news stations. The desert, however, keeps its secrets well. It swallows sound. It distorts distance. It offers endless places for someone to disappear. For nearly 2 months, there was no trace of Erin. No sign of struggle. No clear direction. The abandoned car remained one of the few solid clues, along with that faint smell of gasoline detected near the site. For nearly 8 weeks, Erin was missing. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, and each sunrise reset the search with the same fragile hope that this would be the day she was found alive. Law enforcement coordinated one of the largest search operations the region had seen. More than 3,000 kilometers of rugged terrain were combed methodically. 6 separate agencies joined the effort, along with volunteers who refused to let her name fade from conversation. Helicopters mapped grids from above. Search dogs traced scent trails that dissolved in heat. Investigators retraced the path to her abandoned car again and again, trying to understand why there had been a faint smell of gasoline near the site. Weeks passed. Media coverage intensified. Jonathan spoke publicly, pleading for information, his voice strained but steady. Christopher Brandon Lee stood nearby at times, offering support, answering questions, maintaining composure. But beneath the surface, timelines were tightening. Statements were being compared. Digital footprints were being examined. Still, there was no physical trace of Erin. Then, in August, a group of civilian explorers entered a remote mine shaft deep in the desert. They were experienced spelunkers familiar with abandoned shafts in the region. As they approached one particular opening, one of them paused. There was a smell rising from below. Gasoline. It was faint, but unmistakable. Authorities were called immediately. Investigators returned to the site with specialized equipment. Because the shaft descended vertically and the oxygen levels inside were dangerously low, they lowered a camera first. The feed flickered as it moved downward, rock walls sliding past in unstable light. The air inside was toxic, thick and stale. At approximately 30 meters down, the camera captured a shape. At first it was unclear. Then it sharpened. A human form. Recovery teams worked slowly, carefully navigating the hazardous conditions. When they finally brought Erin to the surface from 76 meters below, the confirmation sent a wave of shock through everyone present. It wasn't just her body they recovered. She was still pregnant. Once Erin was recovered from 76 meters below the surface, the investigation shifted from search to prosecution. Detectives began reconstructing every hour leading up to the day she thought she was meeting Christopher Brandon Lee for something hopeful. Ballistics testing revealed that a shell casing found near the mine shaft matched Christopher's rifle. The weapon he claimed was for coyote hunting. The same rifle he had fired into the air in the desert. Inside his vehicle, investigators discovered components of a homemade rope device consistent with the mechanism believed to have been used near the shaft. His internet history was examined in detail. Searches about disposing of a body. Decomposition timelines. Remote mine locations. These were not vague curiosities. They were specific. Targeted. Layered across days and weeks before Erin disappeared. As the pressure mounted, Christopher's narrative began to shift. Initially cooperative, he later claimed Erin had been emotionally unstable. He suggested she had been abusive toward him. He implied she had slipped accidentally during an argument. Each version attempted to reposition him from planner to victim of circumstance. But digital records do not bend easily. Neither do timelines. In court, he admitted to killing her. But he tried to justify it. His defense strategy centered on panic and self-preservation. He argued that the situation escalated unexpectedly, that he feared exposure, that he reacted impulsively. Prosecutors dismantled that claim methodically, presenting the propane tank purchase, the mine shaft explorations, the Google searches, the borrowed equipment, the lie about hunting, the loaded rifle. This wasn't a moment. It was a sequence. It was preparation. The jury listened. They reviewed the evidence. They considered the fact that Erin had believed she was walking toward a proposal, not into a calculated trap. After only 15 minutes of deliberation, the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read and Christopher Brandon Lee was led away to begin a life sentence without parole, the legal process reached its conclusion. But for Erin's family, closure did not arrive with the sound of a gavel. It arrived in fragments. In candlelight. In silence. In questions that would never be answered. A vigil was held in her honor, candles flickering against the desert night she had once loved. Friends, Marines, neighbors, and strangers gathered to speak her name out loud, refusing to let her final moments define her entire story. Her mother spoke about adoption, about the day Erin first came into her life, comparing that beginning to a gift she had prayed for. She described Erin as gentle and deeply loyal, someone who trusted easily and believed in the goodness of people. That trust had been misplaced, but it had always come from sincerity, not weakness. In the aftermath, petitions circulated calling for abandoned mine shafts in the region to be sealed, so that no other family would endure what theirs had endured. Jonathan, who had called her nearly 50 times on the day she disappeared, chose not to answer loss with violence. He stood publicly with grief instead of anger, a decision that required strength few could understand. Erin believed she was walking toward a future. She believed she was meeting a man who would choose her. She believed something hopeful waited in that desert. She thought she was starting a new life. Instead, her life ended 76 meters below the surface. Erin thought she was safe, but sometimes, the people we trust most are the ones who plan our downfall. Do you think this was premeditated from the start, or did something change that day in the desert? Leave your thoughts in the comments, if you dare. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story we uncover could be even darker, and you won't want to miss it.